Can you move to Germany with zero German? Well, technically, yes, in some cases. But the much better question to ask is, can you build a life in Germany, Austria, or German-speaking Switzerland if every appointment, every official letter, every phone call, and every small interaction depends on English, Google Translate, or someone else helping you? Because this is a completely different question. Maybe you've heard someone say, don't worry, everyone speaks English. And then someone else says, you need to be fluent before you even arrive. And honestly, both answers are misleading. The truth is, you do not need perfect German before you move, but you need to understand what level of German gives you what kind of life. Because there is a big difference between surviving in a German-speaking country and actually feeling independent, confident, and integrated here. So in today's video, I'm going to break down exactly how much German you really need if you're moving to Germany. And this also applies if you're relocating to Austria or the German-speaking part of Switzerland. We'll go through each proficiency level defined by the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, so the CEFR, A1, A2, B1, and B2, and not in a boring exam level way, but I'll explain exactly what each level allows you to do in real life. And if we haven't met yet, hallo und herzlich willkommen bei Speak Fluent German. My name is Salome. I'm a native German teacher, and I specialize in helping English native speakers relocating to Germany, Switzerland, or Austria reach a confident and conversational level in German. And if you are currently preparing for a move and you want a clear roadmap for exactly what to learn first and in what sequence, comment free workshop below. I'll send you the link to my free beginner workshop where I walk you through the foundations you actually need before moving, pronunciation, sentence structure, and practical everyday phrases. So you're not wasting months learning random words you'll never use. All right, so let's break this down. The first thing I want you to understand is this. The question is not really, do I need German? The better question is, what do I want to be able to do without asking someone else for help? Because yes, depending on where you move, you may be able to survive with English for a while. So if you move to Berlin, Munich, Frankfurt, Vienna, Zurich, Basel, or you work in an international company, you may find plenty of people who speak English. You may have English-speaking colleagues. You may be able to order coffee in English. You may even be able to find doctors, landlords, or services that use English. But relocation is very different from travel. When you travel, you can get away with basic phrases and a smile, but when you actually live somewhere, real life starts happening. You need to register your address, you need health insurance, you receive letters from authorities, you need to understand contracts, you may need to call a doctor, you may need to explain a problem to your landlord, you may need to speak to a kindergarten or school teacher, the staff at a bank, or call a customer service or handyman. And suddenly, everyone speaks English becomes much less comforting, because even if many people can speak English, the system around you is still built in German. The forms are in German, the letters are in German, the signs are in German, the appointments are often in German, and many everyday conversations around you will happen in German. So I want you to remember this. English may help you enter the country, but German helps you enter the society. That is the difference. If you only want to survive, you can probably rely on English for a while, especially in a big city. But if you want to feel independent, build relationships, understand what is happening around you, and not panic every time a letter arrives in the mail, German becomes very important very quickly. So let's answer the big question directly. Can you move with zero German? In some cases, yes, but zero German means you are choosing a very high level of dependence. At A0, so no German at all, you may still be able to do certain things. So you may be able to accept an English-speaking job, you may be able to use translation apps, you may be able to ask, sprechen Sie Englisch? You may be able to get through the first few weeks if you have support. But here is what usually happens. At first you think, okay, this is fine, I can manage, right? But then the first official letter arrives, or you need to call a doctor, or your internet stops working and you need customer service, or your landlord sends you a message, or someone at the registration office asks you a follow-up question and you don't understand. And the problem is not just that you don't know the words. The real problem is you start feeling dependent. You start avoiding situations, you delay making those phone calls, you avoid asking the questions, and you hope things will somehow solve themselves. And slowly, German becomes this wall between you and normal daily life. And this is why I don't like telling people, oh, don't worry, you can move here with no German. Because technically, maybe you can, but emotionally, practically, socially, it can be incredibly stressful. And the longer you rely only on English, the easier it is to stay inside the English-speaking bubble. You work in English, you socialize in English, you ask other expats for help. And after 1 year, 2 years, sometimes even 5 or even 10 years in some cases, you still feel like you're living next to the culture instead of inside it. So if you're moving soon and you currently have no German, please don't panic. You don't need to become fluent overnight, but you need to start building the basics as soon as possible. And that brings us to the actual levels. So let's talk about A1, A2, B1, and B2, but in real life terms, because these levels can sound very abstract. What does that actually mean when you're standing in a pharmacy trying to explain that you need something for your headache, right? Or when you're at the Bürgeramt and someone asks you a question. So let's make this very practical so you understand exactly what each level means. Let's start with A0, which means you basically don't speak German yet. You might know words like danke, hallo, bitte, and tschüss, but you can't really form sentences. You can't explain what you need. You can't understand simple answers reliably. This level is possible before moving, but it should not be your comfort zone. At A0, your main tools are translation apps, English-speaking friends, and hoping the other person speaks English. And again, that may work sometimes. But the moment something becomes urgent, emotional, official, or unexpected, A0 becomes very limiting. So if you are currently at A0 and you're moving soon, your goal should not be fluency. Your first goal should be survival German, which means A1. So at A1, you can handle the most basic interactions. You can greet people, you can introduce yourself, you can say where you're from, you can say that you're learning German, you can ask for help, you can ask someone to repeat something, you can say that you don't understand, you can ask where something is, and you can order something simple. At A1, you're not having deep conversations yet, but you're not longer completely helpless. And that matters because one of the biggest confidence shifts for beginners is simply being able to open your mouth and say something, right? Like for example, Entschuldigung, ich verstehe das nicht. Or können Sie das bitte wiederholen? Or können Sie bitte langsamer sprechen? Or ich lerne Deutsch with a huge smile. Always. So at A1, you know a few simple sentences. And if you're newer in the country, these sentences can be very powerful because they give you a way to stay in the interaction instead of freezing. At A1, you still need English, you may still need support, but you can begin to participate. So if you're moving in the next few months and you're starting from complete zero, A1 should be your first goal. Not because it is enough for everything, but because it gives you your first layer of independence. Now let's talk about A2. A2 is where German starts becoming genuinely useful in your daily routines. At A1, you can say, for example, I need help. And at A2, you can start explaining what kind of help you need. That is a big difference, right? At A2, you can usually handle more everyday situations. You can go grocery shopping, you can ask for common items, you can understand prices, numbers, dates, and times more easily. You can make doctor's appointment, you can explain a basic problem, you can ask simple follow-up questions, and you can talk about your daily routine, what you did yesterday, or what you plan to do tomorrow. You can participate in very simple small talk. You can say things like, ich bin neu hier, or ich wohne seit 2 Wochen in Deutschland. At A2, you're still not fluent, you will still miss a lot. People may still switch to English. You may still need to prepare before appointments, but you can start functioning. And this is the level where daily life becomes less intimidating. You start recognizing patterns, you start understanding common phrases, you start realizing, oh, I've heard this before. And that builds confidence. Because confidence does not come from waiting until you know everything. Confidence comes from small wins, one successful bakery order, one successful doctor's appointment, one short conversation with a neighbor, or one moment where you understood the keywords even if you didn't understand every single word. That is how your brain starts building evidence of I can do this. And if you're listening to this right now and thinking, okay, I understand, I don't need perfect German, but I do need a clear path from zero to conversational German, that is exactly what I cover in my free beginner workshop. So comment free workshop below and I'll send you the link to access. Inside the workshop, I show you what to focus on first so you don't waste time jumping between random apps, random grammar videos, and vocabulary lists that don't help you in real conversations. We focus on the foundations that actually make German usable: clear pronunciation, simple sentence patterns, and practical phrases for real life. Especially if you're moving soon, this can save you a ton of time and a lot of confusion. So comment free workshop below to get access. Now let's talk about B1. B1 is the level I would recommend as your relocation goal. Not necessarily before you arrive, but as a level you should aim for if you want to feel independent in a German-speaking country. Because B1 is where German stops being just a language you study and starts becoming a tool you use to live your life. At B1, you can usually explain problems in more detail. You can talk about your background, you can describe your plans, you can understand the main points of many everyday conversations. You can handle many appointments independently, you can participate in workplace conversations, you can tell stories, you can express opinions, and you can say more than just memorized phrases. And that last point is important. At A1 and A2, you often rely heavily on prepared phrases, and that's completely normal and actually really useful. But at B1, you start becoming more flexible. You can take the vocabulary you know and build your own sentences. Not perfectly, but clearly enough to participate. And that is the goal. B1 is not about sounding perfect. B1 is about being able to participate and express yourself. For example, imagine your heating stops working. At A1, you might be able to say, I need help. At A2, you might be able to say, I have a problem with the heating. And at B1, you can say something more like, my heating has not been working since yesterday. I already checked the settings, but it still doesn't get warm. Could someone come by and look at it? That is a very different level of independence. Or imagine you're at a doctor's appointment, right? At A1, you can maybe say, I have pain. At A2, you can describe, I have a pain in my back. And at B1, you can explain when it started, how strong it is, what makes it better or worse, and what you already tried. This is why B1 is such an important level for relocation. It gives you breathing room. You don't feel trapped in every situation. You can explain, you can ask, you can clarify, and you can recover when the conversation doesn't go exactly as planned. Now, do you need B2 before moving? For most people, no. B2 is not the level you need to start your life in Germany, Austria, or German-speaking Switzerland. At this stage, your real focus should be A2 and then eventually B1, because those are the levels that help you survive, function, and become more independent in daily life. B2 becomes relevant later. It matters more if you want to work in a German-speaking environment, or you study in German, or you want to write professional emails, attend meetings, or build deeper relationships outside the expat bubble. So my honest answer is this: you don't need B2 to move. You need A1 to survive, A2 to function, and B1 to feel more independent. B2 can come later once your foundation is strong. Now let's talk about Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, because the daily life language needs are very similar across German-speaking regions. But there are some important differences. And before I say anything here, please remember this is a language learning roadmap, not immigration advice. Visa and residence requirements depend on your nationality, your job, your family situation, your permit type, and many other details. So always check the official requirements for your exact case. But from a language perspective, here is the overview. In Germany, how much German you need depends heavily on three things: your job, your city, and your lifestyle. If you work in IT, for example, or another international field, you may find English-speaking roles. If you live in Berlin or another international city, you may be able to get by in English more often. But even in big cities, German becomes important very quickly for daily life. And especially if you move to a smaller town or rural area, German becomes much more important. So for Germany, my honest recommendation is A1 before arrival if possible, A2 during your first months, and B1 as your independence goal. Because B1 is where you start feeling less like a visitor and more like someone who can actually function in the country. And for some long-term residence situations, German can also become more than just a nice to have. So again, check your specific permit requirements. Austria is very similar in daily life. If you move to Vienna, for example, you may find more English-speaking environments. If you move to a smaller town, German becomes more important very quickly. But for Austria, I would be especially careful about treating German as something you'll start later, because depending on your residence situation, language requirements can matter earlier. So if you're moving to Austria, build German into your relocation plan from the beginning, not as an afterthought. And also remember, Austrian German has some regional vocabulary and pronunciation differences, but as a beginner, don't let that confuse you. Start with standard German. Build your foundation first, then you can gradually learn the local expressions you hear around you. So for Austria, the practical roadmap is similar. A1 before arrival if possible, A2 as your first functional daily life goal, and B1 for long-term independence and integration. Now Switzerland. Switzerland is the one where we need to be more specific because not all of Switzerland is German-speaking. There are German-speaking, French-speaking, Italian-speaking, and Romansh-speaking regions. So the first question is, where exactly are you moving? If you're moving to Zurich, Basel, Bern, Luzern, St. Gallen, or another German-speaking area, then German is relevant. And here is the most important question I get. Should you learn Standard German or Swiss German first? And my recommendation is very clear. You learn Standard German first. Standard German is the foundation for reading, writing, and a lot of the official communication. Swiss German is extremely important later socially. You will hear it everywhere in many parts of German-speaking Switzerland. And yes, at some point you will want to understand more of it. But for most beginners, Swiss German is not the place to start. If you try to learn Swiss German before you have Standard German foundation, it can become very confusing very quickly. So if you are moving to German-speaking Switzerland, start with Standard German. Use it as your base. Then once you're living there, start noticing Swiss German words or expressions gradually. Now let's make this very practical. If you are moving soon, what should you actually learn first? Because this is where many beginners waste a lot of time. They think, well, I need to learn German, so they download an app, they learn random words, they watch random grammar videos, they try to memorize the der, die, and das, and then they get overwhelmed. And they feel like German is impossible. But if you're relocating, you do not need random German. You need German for daily life. You need the German that helps you survive and function in real situations. So here is the roadmap I recommend based on years of teaching experience and helping people learn the language for relocation purposes successfully. If you have 3 to 6 months before moving, your goal is not to learn everything. Your goal is to build a strong foundation. So focus on 5 things. First, pronunciation. This is so important, especially for English speakers, because if your pronunciation is unclear, people may not understand you or they may immediately switch to English and your opportunity to practice is gone. That doesn't mean that you need perfect pronunciation, but you do need clear pronunciation. Second, survival phrases so you can navigate day-to-day life interactions. Third, basic sentence structures, because memorized phrases are useful, but at some point you need to build your own sentences. Fourth, practical vocabulary, not random vocabulary, not zoo animals if you don't need them. Start with words connected to your real life. So home, work, appointments, shopping, health, numbers. Fifth, predictable scripts. Most daily life situations are predictable. Like at the bakery, you know the kind of language you'll need. At the doctor's, you can prepare common phrases. At the registration office, you can prepare what to say. This is how you build confidence before the situation happens. You prepare the phrases in advance. Now let's say you've arrived. Your first 30 days should not be about having impressive conversations. Your first 30 days should be about collecting tiny wins. Tiny wins are interactions that prove your brain, I can use German in real life. For example, saying Guten Morgen to your neighbor or order one thing at the bakery in German. Say your name at an appointment, or ask where something is in a shop. These moments may feel small, but they matter because every small successful interaction reduces the fear. And every time you use German and survive the moment, your confidence grows. Your first goal should not be to impress anyone. Your first goal is to collect evidence that you can function in German. And this is how real confidence starts. And if you want help and guidance to get to this stage, comment free workshop below and we'll send you the link to register completely for free. The workshop will help you stop guessing and start building a foundation that is actually useful for your relocation. So again, if you're moving soon and you want to know what to learn first, comment free workshop below. Now, in your first 3 to 6 months, your goal should be to move toward A2. This is where you become more functional in your routine. At this stage, focus on repeated situations like the doctor, the pharmacy, small talk with your neighbors, ordering food, making plans, explaining simple problems. If you like doing sports regularly, your vocabulary should be around situations you encounter there. So your German should match your real life. That's why random learning often fails, because it doesn't connect to the situations you actually face. Now, after 6 to 12 months, your goal should be moving toward B1. This is where you start building real independence. At this stage, you want to practice longer sentences. You want to be able to tell stories, explain your opinion, describe problems in more detail, and maybe even join local groups, clubs, or communities. Because language is not just something you study, it is something you use to participate. And if you only study alone but never use German in real situations, your confidence will stay limited. So at this stage, start putting yourself in situations where German is useful. Not terrifying, but useful. Maybe it's a sports club, maybe it's volunteering, maybe it's a local event, because you don't become confident by waiting until you're ready. You become confident by doing small things before you feel completely ready. So if you are planning to relocate to Germany, Switzerland, or Austria soon and you don't want to arrive feeling completely lost, comment free workshop below. I'll send you the link to my free beginner workshop. Inside, I'll walk you through the exact foundations I recommend for beginners who want real life German, not random grammar, not random vocabulary, not endless abstracts that still leave you freezing in conversations. We'll look at the pronunciation basics that help people understand you more easily. Also, we'll look at sentence patterns that help you build your own German sentences, and practical everyday phrases you can start using immediately. The kind of German you actually need at appointments, in shops, when asking for help, and in normal daily life. So if you're serious about becoming more confident and independent before or after your move, comment free workshop below and I'll send you the link. And if you're wondering what the best way is to actually start learning German as a beginner, watch this video next, where I walk you through the learning method I teach if your goal is real-life communication and not just memorizing random words. Das ist alles für heute. Vielen Dank fürs Zuschauen und bis zum nächsten Mal. Tschüss!